Yeah, this exhibition is called Thresholding. I kind of ended up having to sort of invent a word because I couldn't find a word that really described quite what I was trying to get at with this work. Basically, the idea of, I think of, threshold is something, if we go from one place to another or one state to another, then the idea of thresholding would be to sort of hold between and not jump from one state or one place, but it kind of indicates, to me, it indicates a place of, I think of sort of, well, literally a doorway is a threshold, but also so is a ritual, and so is time. And in this case, I'm looking at like dawn and dusk and twilight being a particularly kind of threshold time. Yeah, and I guess literally between sort of day and night. The images that I make are not portraits of people as such, but I do begin with a physical person. So I usually begin with a photograph that I've taken of a friend or a family member. I mix those photographs sometimes with just sketches that I've done from something I've seen or from a memory or a dream. Sometimes I might start with a couple of photos. It's sort of, the work is intentionally fictional. What I use those initial photos for is just basically for finding kind of structure. So that very first step, I'm basically kind of mapping out proportions. So on the linen or on the canvas, I'm kind of like, eyes are around there, nose is around there, mouth is, just the sort of practicalities of getting that started. And that process for me is because I'm working at such a huge scale, I'm having to walk forward and back like quite a long way to actually to get enough perspective to sort of set that up right. And later in the painting, a lot of that will change, but that's my first sort of step is that. And sometimes I just do that in chalk because I don't necessarily want all of that showing through at the end. And other times I think, no, yum, let's let the whole story come through, and I actually get straight in there with, often just with a brush, a kind of a inky brush to begin. And then once it's mapped out, then I go in and I usually, the first aspect of these works that I'm doing is, so all of the paintings have what I think of as being like anchors. The idea is that the work's really gestural and loose and very abstract, but for that to kind of all hold together, it needs to hang on something, and so in most cases that's like the eyes. So when I'm painting them actually not with these big kind of trowels and things that I do the rest of the painting with, but with brushes, and that's quite, I try and keep it really loose, but it's still a little bit kind of, has to be precise in the sense that it has to, I really want those reading as three-dimensional kind of glossy, wet eyes, and so, that process is probably the first thing, and that kind of opens up like a pocket of three-dimensional space on the surface, and that's sort of, to me, when it becomes exciting, because it's like, oh, okay, there's space in that body, it's not just a flat skin anymore. And then from there, that's when but I don't completely work them, I get the most of it done, and I'll probably come back in and out of them as I go, but that's sort of, that's probably the starting point. So how I kind of got into really thick impasto painting in the first place was that I used to make these works that were really, I've always been really into loose gestural painting, but I used to work slowly building up layer and layer and layer in that kind of Renaissance method of painting, which would take me maybe 4 months to complete a work. And then I ended up in this situation where, long story, and I won't go into it here, but it's kind of interesting about starting to work fast. And I love that because I feel like it keeps heaps of energy in the work, and it keeps, a lot of the marks, they translate. When we're reading paintings, we're always reading how those marks translate, so whether they're kind of nervous marks or really confident marks. And our bodies kind of respond when we're watching, so I want to like play those notes when I'm painting. So then when I ended up working in this way where it's all kind of built up a lot over the surface, that kind of happened because I got works back from a show and I realised that they just didn't look that different on screen than they looked like in real life. And I feel like the real world, paintings are one of the kind of there's not many things that we spend physical time and space with now, like so many things sort of translate really well digitally, but painting I feel like is a different thing. And so I wanted them to really operate in three-dimensional space. And so I started pushing into kind of trying to use thicker paint and use it in quite a sculptural way. And that's how I kind of developed that technique of the really kind of thick impasto covering of everything. But then I had it was basically studying mangroves, those plant forms that live between the tide, or between the ocean and the land. I got very interested in them as kind of threshold beings, I guess, or liminal bodies, and I started really studying their language. And a lot of there's a lot of mud, which is kind of why I started using this the raw linen for that colour, and then the mark making being very sort of spindly, and their beautiful roots that come up like this out of the mud, which are for breathing. They're like straws for breathing. And yeah, when I was sitting with them one time, I kind of realized that marks in a painting are also looking for oxygen, so it really felt like this, that's how all of that kind of wove through. And that's why I wanted to start exploring this way of working, which is using less marks, less language to to carry the same amount of density. So it's sort of funny, it's like people often look at the works that are more open, and they think, oh, that must be like easier or quicker or whatever. And it's funny because in actual fact, for me, it's a lot harder. It's like trying to, it's like having, like, what's the word? They feel like a poem, like when I think about like what the job of poetry is, like to kind of use less words to have more power or depth. And so it feels like that kind of, Drawing is a really important part of art making for me, but when I'm talking about drawing, I'm talking about, I guess, making movements in space. And so, yes, like a pencil sketch is a drawing, but so is the way a body moves, So I'm really interested in terms of drawing about when I watch people with the paintings that I make, like what drawings are their bodies making, What I feel like I'm always looking for drawings and studying drawings, making drawings, but they are, sometimes it's me like flying around the studio trying to get my body into the kind of drawing that can make a painting, and sometimes it's like where I live rurally, and I see, there's people do donuts or burnouts down the road, and I'm always like, wow, such beautiful drawings, because they're the drawings that tell the story of speed and heat and adrenaline, and so I love the practice of drawing. I love the practice of kind of trying to extend what drawing is, and the power of drawing to sort of tell stories. I think a beautiful thing, one time I remember seeing lipstick on the side of someone's shirt, and I just thought, wow, what a drawing, like amazing. It's mark making, it's pigment, it's but the story that kind of alludes to or suggests or tells, or the mystery in that is, So I think drawing's a really cool thing to explore and play with, So I grew up in Te Waipounamu in this part of the country where there's just like big plains basically, and huge skies. And I think that the kind of high drama of the natural world, the sort of scale of that, I feel like maybe that, and in the scale of like Aoraki and like all of those mountains down south, I kind of think there's, I feel like a lot of these things sort of thread into my love for scale, Again, I guess that thing of storytelling, like as soon as we blow something out in terms of to a really grand scale or a really tiny scale, it shifts us into the realm of imagination. So, if I make a face that's similar to the size of our faces, we're going to kind of yeah, we read that in a certain way, and then, but I could easily, just as easily make these paintings this big, and I think they would kind of do the same work in reverse. It's just that I love painting and I love feeling my body moving when I'm painting, which is why I'm so drawn to kind of large work. But also, yeah, I think it really, it working at this scale, like, pushes things into, like, I think of like the pantheon of, like, you know, goddesses and gods, and it's like a, it allows us to kind of, yeah, it's sort of jump out of our daily life into a wilder kind of place of imagination, maybe. Yeah. So I guess the thing that I would want to say to young people is that we need artists, you know. The world really, really needs artists, and that it's a beautiful, beautiful life, a life of kind of deep looking and of exploring, and also though that just that artistry is everywhere, you know, and being an artist, like I'm a kind of visual artist, and that's what I'm doing with my life at the moment, is amazing, but it's only one way of expressing artistry and being an artist. And some of the artists that I love and admire most in the world are tradies. Like a friend of mine has diggers, and he's out there sort of literally sculpting the earth, and people probably don't think he is an artist, but he works with such artistry. And, you know, and I kind of, so I guess the main thing I would say is that, yeah, whatever you love doing, I feel like being an artist is being true to what makes us feel kind of invigorated and excited and curious. So like whatever makes you feel invigorated and excited and curious is your artistry. And yeah, and so please be an artist. Yeah. Right now the light's literally kind of coming up in the gallery, just slowly, in the same way that the dawn breaks or the dusk breaks. And as that happens, like what happens if you go outside and spend some time in the natural world when that's happening, all the pigments start getting really powerful, and you'll notice there's, yeah, the brighter the light gets. So like right now we've got all these amazing colours in the shadows. As all the sort of saturation and the pigment comes up with the light, and then as we're starting to lose it now, you'll just notice we're kind of moving back into that grey scale where it becomes almost just like a black and white image. It's a cool thing to do if you want to go outside at night and just watch things, and you'll notice that things turn much more into shape. We lose a lot of the three-dimensionality, but you gain a whole lot of other interesting stuff, which is, you know, can be really fun to kind of think about making night drawings. And got the eyes are these kind of, they create this sort of sense of deep space, and they're painted in kind of a realistic way, which is a real big contrast to all of the surface, which is really loose, really abstract. Up close, it just feels like an abstract painting. Paintings really activate when they have tension, you know, so you often want things to be pushing against each other, which is why I've got some marks that are like really small in the eyes, and then these marks here, which I've actually made with a big cake icing tool, and dragged the paint down. And tonally, a lot of, you'll see like these marks here, they're similar to the tone of the linen, and that means that they kind of sit at the same place. When you're putting the shadows in, I think of it as sort of sinking backwards into space, you know, so it's like almost creating a cavern. This painting is actually called Cavern. And then when you have the lighter colours, they're going to push themselves out to the surface. So in this case, the face is much like a mountain as it is like a face. You got these huge forms that kind of come in, you know, dig marks that are like this. This is like, I think of this as like a landslide. Landscape painting is a really exciting thing in terms of, I feel like all paintings are landscape paintings, and it's a nice way to think of like the topography or the surface. Yeah. This painting is called Soluble. It's one of the two works in the show that are kind of completely covered over. Sometimes I think of them as being suffocated with paint because they don't have the breathing space. But when they're working like this, then you've got it's sort of like different technical things that you start leaning on. I think a lot about variety of the size of marks that we make. Usually I try and have a lot of that tension between making marks that are really big, like big fat marks, and then very fine searching marks. But this painting here I think of more in terms of like being like a tapestry, like it feels, or you know, when you look down from the plane and you see all of the kind of paddocks cut into little pieces, it's because the mark making on this work is largely at a similar scale. Basically what starts happening is that kind of patterning of texture is, it allows the whole painting to do something else. And I wouldn't usually paint like this, but you know, using all marks that are pretty much the same size. With this painting, it started out being like one of those ones with lots of kind of space, a very open painting. And the more I went through, the more it just kind of wanted to close itself up. And it was like, so, you know, when I was talking about this like a kind of quilt or like a patchwork, in some ways it's like it just wanted a blanket over the whole thing. And but again, we're still working with this idea of tension. So the eyes are closed in this, so it naturally kind of is going to, I think of these paintings as kind of closing themselves over or becoming more quiet. And in the same way, we might like put a cloak around ourselves when we want to feel like that physically. So I guess in this example, I'm trying to also think about what's a way to use paint that isn't, maybe the paint is sort of less distracting from the image in this one. It's still building up areas of, you know, the simple structure of making something that has form is lots about looking at shadow and, you know, where's the shadow, where's the light? So where's the light coming from, and then therefore where's the shadow on the other side of that? But yeah, I was thinking in terms of for students who are making paintings, I think that one of the things that's been the most useful for me recently is trying to really push myself to study shadow in a more deep way. I think sometimes we just sort of think it's like light and dark, but actually there's sometimes you can fudge things by not having too much going on in the shadows, but it's really exciting creatively to kind of really, I guess in a metaphorical way and in a literal way, to explore the shadows. And then to sort of start realizing just how much color is in the shadows, or how much tone or texture and depth, and yeah.